It was the kind of hot southern afternoon where even the cicadas sang slower, and the thick scent of magnolias hung heavy in the humid Louisiana air, wrapping around the neighborhood like an old wool blanket nobody asked for. The sun burned down. On East Monroe, a forgotten corner of a small town where time seemed to limp along like the old men sitting on crooked porches, fanning themselves with newspaper and trading the same stories for the 5th time that week. On Franklin Street, 3 boys pedaled their rusty bikes over cracked sidewalks, past houses that wore peeling paint like old soldiers wearing faded medals. There was Marcus, tall and lanky at 14, already carrying the quiet strength of someone twice his age. He was the big brother type, not just to his 10-year-old sibling, Elijah, but to just about anyone who needed protection. Elijah, with his wild curls and wilder imagination, lived half in the real world and half in the one he invented, where dragons flew over rooftops and every stranger might be a secret agent. And then there was Jamal, 13, funny and clever, who could make a stick and a paperclip into a working catapult, and who had more heart than most grown men. The boys didn't have much, not new bikes, not fancy shoes, not gadgets or video games, but what they had was each other and their little slice of the world, which on this day stretched from Miss Dolores's porch steps to the edge of Henderson's auto shop. Their mamas trusted them, not because the world was safe, but because they had raised their boys to be good, to look out for one another, and to help where they could. That's when the shiny black car turned the corner, catching their attention. Like a spaceship had landed. It didn't belong there, not with its spotless windows and sleek body that looked like it had never tasted gravel. As it approached, they heard the sudden thud-thud of a tire giving out, then a slow, painful roll as it limped to the side of the road and stopped right near the mailbox that had Watkins Family painted in flaking red letters. The door opened, and out stepped a man who looked like he'd just walked out of a magazine. He was white, older, maybe late 50s, with gray temples and a sharp jawline. But he looked lost in that suit, like he didn't belong under the southern sun or near the smell of fried catfish wafting from someone's kitchen window. Sweat soaked through his white shirt. His hands shook slightly as he opened the trunk and stared in disbelief. No spare, nothing. The man looked around, and for a moment the boys thought he might yell, or kick the tire, or curse the sky like grown-ups sometimes did when things went wrong. But instead, he just leaned against the car, rubbing his temples like the whole world had fallen on him. The boys exchanged glances. No one said anything, but Marcus was already pedaling. Toward him, his brother and Jamal right behind. "Sir," Marcus said politely, "you need help." The man looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected anyone to care. He hesitated. "Flat tire. No tools. I'm stranded." "We can help," Elijah grinned. And, without waiting, he darted toward the corner where Jamal's uncle ran a tiny mechanic shop. 10 minutes later, they were back, lugging an old hydraulic jack, a crowbar, and a dusty toolbox that looked like it had survived 2 wars. Jamal knelt by the wheel like he'd done it before, and Marcus directed, steady and calm. Elijah handed tools like a nurse in an ER. They laughed, teased each other, got grease all over their clothes. But the tire was soon off, patched as best as possible, and bolted back into place. The man didn't say much while they worked. He watched them like someone watching a dream he didn't quite believe, blinking too often, his hands twitching slightly. When it was done, and the car looked ready to drive again, the man finally reached for his wallet. "Let me pay you boys something," he said, voice hoarse. Marcus shook his head. "That's okay, sir. You looked like you needed help. That's all. No charge," Jamal added. "But if you ever come back this way, Miss Dolores makes the best peach cobbler south of the Mississippi." The man chuckled, a sound that almost startled him. It was the first laugh he'd made all day. "What are your names?" he asked, and they told him, Marcus, Elijah, Jamal. He nodded slowly, like he was memorizing them. "You boys," he said softly, "you just saved more than a flat tire today." They didn't understand what he meant. "You take care now," Marcus said, brushing his hands off. "Drive safe." The man nodded again, got into the car, and drove off without another word. The black sedan disappearing around the corner and out of their lives. So they thought. But what none of them knew was that the man had been on the brink. That morning, he had left a note on the marble countertop of his empty penthouse, where no children's laughter ever echoed and no one waited for him to come home. His wife had passed a year ago. His only son had shut him out long ago. And after selling his company for a sum that should have brought joy, but instead brought silence, he felt like a man erased. The flat tire had seemed like the last cruel joke. He had planned to drive his car into the lake, just west of town, to let the water swallow the weight he no longer wanted to carry. But then 3 boys who had nothing, yet gave him everything, showed him a moment of unfiltered kindness, without knowing who he was, without asking anything in return. They didn't treat him like a billionaire or a stranger. They treated him like a man worth saving. And for the first time in months, he questioned his ending. That night, in a hotel room he hadn't planned to sleep in, he sat staring at the ceiling and thinking of Elijah's wide grin, Marcus's steady hands, and Jamal's clever fingers covered in grease. And something shifted deep in his chest, feeling he thought he had buried long ago. Purpose. The next morning, just as the sun began to stretch its fingers over East Monroe's sleepy rooftops, a long black SUV rolled quietly down Franklin Street. Its windows were tinted, but inside sat the same man, though something in his eyes had changed. He wasn't lost anymore. He wasn't broken. And this time, he wasn't leaving without doing something that mattered. The sun had barely begun to rise when the quiet rumble of the black SUV returned to Franklin Street, its sleek body gliding past old trucks, rusted bicycles, and the sleepy hush of a neighborhood still stretching itself awake. Windows lit up slowly as curious eyes peeked through blinds, wondering what such a car was doing back in their part of town. At the corner of the street, Mrs. Rose, who had been sitting on her porch every morning for the past 32 years with a cup of chicory, coffee, and a heart full of town gossip, narrowed her eyes behind thick glasses. "Didn't I see that car yesterday?" she mumbled to herself. Inside the SUV, Mr. Jonathan Whitaker, former CEO of a global software empire and a man once named one of the 50 most powerful people in America, sat in the back seat with hands folded over a worn photograph he had pulled from a shoebox late last night. It was of himself, decades younger, standing beside his father's old Chevy with a tire iron in hand, grinning proudly. That was the last time he had ever changed a tire before college, before Wall Street, before he became rich enough to forget how to talk to ordinary people. But yesterday, 3 boys had reminded him of that smile, of that boy. They had reminded him what humanity felt like without contracts, without bodyguards, without performance. And today, he had come back, not just to say thank you, but to rewrite the legacy of his wealth with something far more valuable than dollars. As the SUV came to a stop outside the modest Watkins home, the boys were still inside, getting ready for another day of riding bikes and playing with a half-deflated basketball. Their mother, Denise Watkins, was stirring oatmeal on the stove when she glanced out the window and felt her heart stop. No one drove cars like that around here. She set the pot down and wiped her hands anxiously. The doorbell rang. Slowly, cautiously, she opened it to find a well-dressed man standing on her porch, not the same man from yesterday. Not in appearance at least, but the same eyes, now clear and alive. "Mrs. Watkins?" he asked gently. "Yes, I believe. Your sons helped me yesterday when I had a flat tire." She relaxed slightly, nodding, but still wary. They did. Wouldn't stop talking about it all evening. "May I come in for a moment? I'd like to speak with them." "And you?" She paused, then opened the door wider. "All right." Come on in. Elijah came bounding down the hallway first, followed by Marcus and Jamal, who had come over early that morning, as he always did. When they saw the man standing there, their faces lit up with recognition and surprise. "Hey, it's the tire guy." Elijah grinned. The man chuckled. "Yes, the tire guy. But my name's Jonathan Whitaker." That name meant nothing to them, but it didn't matter. He knelt down a little so he could look them eye to eye. "Boys, yesterday you helped me when I didn't know I needed help. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't care what I looked like, what kind of car I drove, or what I had in my wallet. You just saw someone in trouble, and you did something most adults don't anymore. You acted out of kindness." Marcus shrugged. "Seemed like the right thing to do." "It was," Jonathan said, his voice cracking slightly. "More than you know." He turned to their mother. "Ma'am, I don't mean to startle you, but I like to show my gratitude in a way that matters." Denise looked hesitant. "Sir, with all due respect, they don't need payment. They need opportunity." Jonathan smiled, as if she had spoken the exact word he was hoping to hear. "That's exactly what I came to offer." Over the next hour, as neighbors whispered and stared from windows, Mr. Whitaker laid out a vision that sounded like something from a movie. He explained that he had established a new foundation just last night, with 3 names at the heart of its mission: Marcus, Elijah, and Jamal. "The MEJ Foundation," he said proudly. "Its purpose is simple: to reward decency, foster potential, and invest in neighborhoods like this one, where good people often go unseen." Denise was speechless. The boys just blinked. Then he added, "And I want to start by offering your sons full scholarships to any school of their choosing, private, charter, boarding, wherever their dreams take them. I've already spoken to several educational consultants who will guide you through everything. And that's not all. I've bought the old Henderson garage 2 blocks over. I'd like to rebuild it as a youth tech and mechanics center, where local kids can learn skills, engineering, coding, repairs free of cost, run by a team I'm flying in next week." "And Jamal," he said, turning to the boy with grease still, "under his nails, you'll be the very first junior apprentice." Jamal's mouth fell open. "You mean, like, work there?" "No," Jonathan smiled. "You mean lead there." Elijah's eyes were wide, like real school, with real computers. "The best ones money can buy," Jonathan said. "But more importantly, you'll have mentors, people who listen, people who believe in you." Denise sat down hard in her chair, hands trembling, tears beginning to spill from her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Jonathan knelt beside her. "Because yesterday, your boys gave me a reason not to give up. They didn't know they were saving me, but they were. And if I can spend the rest of my life multiplying that kind of goodness, then maybe I deserve the second chance they gave me. Word spread through the town faster than sweet tea spilled on a summer dress. By lunchtime, everyone on Franklin Street was buzzing about the black SUV, the mysterious rich man, and the boys whose kindness had unlocked a miracle. But for Marcus, Elijah, and Jamal, the true joy wasn't in the money or the fame. It was in the possibilities that had once seemed impossible. That afternoon, Jonathan invited them for a ride in the SUV, just a short drive to a nearby lake, where he had once thought about ending everything. He showed them the very spot and told them the truth. I had decided I was done, until you three showed me I wasn't invisible. There was silence for a while. Marcus looked out at the shimmering water and said, "Maybe this is where you were supposed to come all along, not to disappear, but to begin again." Jonathan nodded, blinking away emotion. "I think so too." As the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting golden shadows over the lake, and the boys who unknowingly brought a man back from the brink, Jonathan made a silent vow to never again pass by goodness without stopping, to never let wealth blind him to worth, and to never forget the hands of three boys who didn't care about who he was, only about who he could be. Time has a strange way of moving slow as honey when you're waiting, fast as lightning when you wish it would linger. Months passed since that black SUV first rolled down Franklin Street, but for the Watkins family, Jamal, and the town of East Monroe, life would never return to the way it was. The MEJ Foundation wasn't just a name on paper. It became the heartbeat of a neighborhood once forgotten. The old Henderson garage, once a dusty shell of bolts and broken dreams, had transformed into a place that glowed at night with glass walls, LED light, and the soft hum of opportunity. Inside, children who had never touched a computer were now coding their first games. Teens who once skipped school sat hunched over drones, engines, and robotics kits, their hands creating futures they once thought were reserved for kids in faraway cities. Jamal, barely a teenager, walked through the center every day with a badge that read Junior Mentor. His chin high, not because of pride, but because, for the first time, he was needed. Kids looked up to him, teachers listened, and his uncle once thought fixing engines was the highest calling for their family stood in tears watching his nephew teach others. Elijah, the youngest, had found a different kind of magic. With his wild imagination and boundless energy, he became the face of the Foundation's storytelling lab, where he wrote comic books, narrated neighborhood tales, and turned every dusty corner of East Monroe into a world of heroes and dreams. The local librarian said she hadn't seen that many boys reading since the 80s, and Marcus, he had always carried himself with a quiet gravity, but now he walked with purpose. Thanks to Jonathan's team of consultants, Marcus had been accepted into a preparatory academy in New Orleans. He came home on weekends with stories about things they had never imagined: mock flight simulators, science labs with real telescopes, a teacher who used to work at NASA, and he never stopped thanking his mother for believing in him, even when he couldn't yet see who he was becoming. As for Jonathan Whitaker, he traded in boardrooms for community centers, suits for rolled-up sleeves. The mansion he once lived in remained empty, while he stayed in a modest home not far from the boys, where the sound of their laughter filtered through his open windows like a hymn. He visited the garage every week, sometimes just to sit and listen, sometimes to offer lessons about business, resilience, or how to keep your humanity when the world tries to buy it. The town didn't just accept him, they embraced him. At the local church, the same one where Denise sang in the choir, Jonathan sat in the back pew every Sunday morning, wiping his eyes when the voices rose too high, and thanking God for 3 boys who pulled him from the edge of despair. But perhaps the most powerful moment came nearly a year later, on a bright spring morning that smelled of fresh grass and redemption. The mayor, who had once skipped over East Monroe during campaign tours, now stood under a white canopy erected in front of the garage for the town's biggest event, the MEJ Legacy Celebration. Folding chairs filled with mothers, grandfathers, retired teachers, and rows of children with wide eyes and eager hearts. The town hadn't seen this much joy in decades. Even the news crews came. Marcus, now taller, with a soft mustache and a gentle confidence, took the stage first. "We didn't fix that man's tire for a reward," he said into the microphone, his voice steady. "We just thought he needed help. But turns out, maybe we needed him too." Applause filled the air like fireworks. Then Jamal stepped up. "When I held a wrench, I saw broken things. But now I see tools that build futures." And finally, Elijah, who practically danced onto the stage, said, "My mom says kindness is a seed you plant. I think we planted a whole forest." The audience roared with laughter and love. But then came the moment that would echo for years to come. Jonathan Whitaker stepped up to the podium. He looked different, now not polished and weary, but grounded and full of life. He wore jeans, a checkered shirt, and on his lapel a pin with 3 small initials, MEJ. He looked out at the crowd and began to speak, not like a billionaire, not like a guest, but like a man who had come home. "A year ago, I thought my story was over," he began, voice low. "I had spent a lifetime building wealth, but not a life. I had success, but not purpose. I had everything, and yet I felt nothing, until 3 boys reminded me of the one thing I'd lost: my belief in people, in goodness, in tomorrow." He paused, and the crowd leaned in. "I had a flat tire, but the real thing that was broken was me." They fixed both. Silence, then sniffles, then tears. To make something clear, the MEJ Foundation is not a charity, it's a partnership. Because the future doesn't belong to me or to the rich. It belongs to the ones who dare to care. And these boys, Marcus, Elijah, and Jamal, cared enough to change my life. Today, I'd like to announce something new. A scholarship fund in their names, not just for this town, but for any child across this country who chooses kindness first, who helps a stranger, who believes that doing the right thing matters. Gasps echoed, then cheers. Denise buried her face in her hands. Her boys had become symbols not of fame or fortune, but of faith. That evening, under strings of yellow lights and tables full of food, music played and stories were shared. Old men told tales they hadn't shared in decades. Grandmothers clapped to gospel rhythms. Children chased balloons down the street. And in the center of it all sat 3 boys, arms around each other. No longer just kids on bikes, but young men whose kindness had redrawn the map of an entire town. As the stars came out, Elijah looked up and said to Marcus, "Do you think he would have really driven into the lake that day?" Marcus looked toward Jonathan, who was dancing awkwardly with Miss Dolores to an old Sam Cooke song. "I think he was already drowning," he said softly. "We just gave him a rope." And Jamal, who had been quietly watching the glowing windows of the tech garage, added, "And look what he built with it." The sky above East Monroe sparkled quietly, as if the heavens themselves were applauding. No one saw it coming. No one expected that a flat tire on a hot afternoon would become the spark for a legacy. But that's how miracles work. They come quietly, dressed as everyday moments. And sometimes they ride in on rusty bikes and leave behind a world forever changed.